Is it a war? Is it not a war? Is it a ceasefire? Is it not a ceasefire? All we know is Canadians are getting hosed at the gas pump because of the ongoing conflict in Iran. It started way back on February 28th, and here we are at the end of May, and we have no idea when it ever will truly end. To talk more about it, talking about Paul, Brian, gentlemen, this is something I didn't think we'd still be talking about this many months later, but here we are, and it's still going on.
It is, Jim. And prior to the show, I was mentioning to both of you that I had watched a podcast, and if you know, we're loving doing the podcast thing here at True Patriot Love. But you know, I was watching Diary of a CEO.
Oh, he's fantastic, Stephen.
Right?
Yeah.
And Professor Zhang was on, and you know, I don't agree with everything he says, but quite frankly, he had a whole theory on what was happening in Iran, and we tied that the other day to a show we did on CUSMA. So stay with me for a minute because it's very interesting. You watch what's happening with oil and gas prices, what's happening now with CUSMA. Now with CUSMA, we did another show where Jameson Greer comes out just as we're editing the show, and he says, I'm going to Mexico. I'm not bringing the Canadians. I'm going to have a negotiation with the Mexicans. And you know what? I'm going to come back July 1, and I'm going to tell you if I want to continue our 16-year deal on CUSMA, or if I want to say goodbye to it and just go year to year, or if I want to terminate it. And everyone's like, big gulp. Then on the heels of that, he comes out and he made basically 4 statements that I thought were really compelling. The first one, he said, the U.S. are going to be talking about rules of origin in a way that enhances U.S. content in all goods in the Western Hemisphere. So think about that for a minute. Because that's fresh out of the National Defense Paper, National Defense Strategy, that we read out in December. And when we read it, I was like, wow. I thought it was earth-shattering when we read it out in December. No one really looked at it. It actually got put on a shelf. But, you know, for those of you who have time this weekend, when you're bored and you're sitting around reading or doing or by the pool, read it. Because it is a very interesting document, which a part of it talks about how economy is the essential fundamental to national strategy, to national security. So
I can't see anyone arguing with that one.
How about economic security?
Yeah.
2, negotiations. And this is Greer again. Negotiations are also going to focus on external tariff coordination with the goal of reducing the amount of Chinese products entering the U.S. supply chains through Canada and Mexico, which is again fresh out of this national security paper. 3, U.S. tariffs on Mexico and Canada aren't going away. The U.S. government is going to have tariffs as long as we have giant deficits. So in other words, we are always going to have tariffs. So regardless of what we negotiate in CUSMA or USMA or whatever we want to call it, we're going to have tariffs. And then number 4, if the U.S. can come to good terms with Mexico and others in the region on external tariffs, it makes it easier for us to give preferential treatment to people in the region. So in other words, if you abide by or you actually work with us on how we're going to tariff the rest of the world, we're going to be good to you in the Western Hemisphere.
Correct. However, our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has already fired a shot across their bow this week with some pretty big defense contracts, both by bypassing Boeing and America for their next generation of AWAC planes. Canada's never had an AWAC plane. We've always sent air crew to join the AWAC planes, the famous E3, and that has always been in the NATO base in Brussels. Now here, we just bought 6 Saab Bombardier, Canadian-made, Canadian-produced AWAC planes, bypassing Boeing. And they signed other deals bypassing American manufacturers to buy their own equipment. And I think that has really put a bee in the bonnet of the Pentagon and the U.S. government, because they're telling Canada, and it was a leaked memo, that, this is your things. You have to buy this, this, and this. And here's the supplier. And Canada's giving them the big middle finger saying, no, we're going to buy from somebody else.
Well, I think that's a foolish move by Canada, to be quite honest with you. I think that's absolute stupidity. How are we going to compete with the United States? They have historically been our greatest ally. Historically, they've been willing to defend us if something horrible were to happen. Historically, we've amalgamated ourselves into their sports, into their culture. They're not this giant monster that they're being made out to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you turn back the clock and you go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, we had tariffs. We had tariffs all the way along for a very, very long time. And then free trade was introduced, and everyone complained about free trade. It was going to be a horrible thing. It was going to decimate the nation.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. And now it's not looking so great in the global economy. And tariffs may be the necessary evil required to bring the Western Hemisphere back to prominence on the world stage. The Western Hemisphere was unbeatable through the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s. So I don't know why we would push against the United States with such force and try and embarrass them. I think that what we should be doing is maybe, there's an old saying, seek to understand, not to be understood. And right now, I have a sneaking suspicion that Prime Minister Carney, small in stature, loud in voice, is walking around saying, look at me, I'm going to thump my chest, and by the way, thumb in your eye, and that sort of...
And I'm not disagreeing with you, Brian, but he did paint himself in a corner a couple months ago when he said he proclaimed that 70% of our future military purchases would be Canadian ties or Canadian manufacturing. So these Global Eye AWAC planes they're buying are Swedish/Saab technology built at the Bombardier plant in Montreal. And they're trying to sign every deal he's trying to sign now that $7 out of $10 is spent in Canada with ties to Canadian jobs. So, I mean, that's his mandate as prime minister now.
No. And I get it. And Jameson Greer, we're going to throw the clip on the screen now.
And the reality is we've spent the past year and a half going to countries telling them we have to have some level of tariff on the globe to deal with this giant deficit we're dealing with, to try to reshore, et cetera. And most countries have, I know grudgingly, but they've said, we understand your policy. We understand, so we're going to negotiate with you. We're going to remove some of these tariffs and non-tariff barriers, et cetera. Canada's approach has been different. They, like China, retaliated against the United States. 2 countries in the world retaliated against us: People's Republic of China and Canada. So they're just in a different spot.
He's still criticizing us. So we're still getting criticism over kind of our pushback. And he's saying, China and Canada are the only 2 who have pushed back on the tariff front. So I think we have to walk that line very finely. But, I want to get into, because this is a really interesting thing. I want to get into not only the national security strategy, but I also want to talk about Iran for a minute. Because, we're kind of walking a funny line right now, because as Canadians, we're waiting to see the outcome of what's going to happen in Iran. And for most people, when I talk to now, they're like, is that still going on? Today, we saw they're trying to get a 60-day ceasefire in place. You mentioned it on the intro, Jim. And when we all woke up and we saw Maduro being, hauled out of Venezuela, and then we saw the U.S. entering into Iran, we all thought, okay, this is going to be short. This is going to be quick. This is going to be short. Well, it turns out it's not. And Jim, I got to give you credit, because when that happened, you said, this is not going to be short. You said the topography of Iran is much different than Iraq. And quite frankly, one being desert and flat, and the other being mountainous and hard to conquer.
Because all their stuff's hidden in the rock. Exactly. They can't find it.
Exactly. But, the U.S. was in a funny spot. So, we don't talk about it a lot. And I know, Professor Young on the show with Stephen on Diary of a CEO, he mentioned it. And it was a really interesting point. He basically said that the U.S. was in such a precarious position because when Russia and the Ukraine basically went to war, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Chinese started to form a faction. Mm-hmm. And looking at the petrodollar and looking at gold as a standard. And it put the U.S. in a very uncomfortable situation. So, I started the show when you did your intro with, economic stability right, is the key to national stability. And so the U.S. was looking at it and they're like, uh-oh, we have a problem here because quite frankly, our Navy controls all these shipping lanes right now. These countries are getting together. They're talking about a rail system. They're talking about using gold again as a currency. And for those of you, it's interesting. Remember a few months ago, we were watching gold. Like, we were all getting up in the morning. We were going, wow, gold's like crazy, right? That's just before the Iranian war.
Yep.
Are we talking about gold now?
No, all I'm talking about, my neighbors are talking about is the fact that I got a bargain because I only paid $1.73 a liter at the gas pump.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was in Nova Scotia in the weekend and they're paying $1.90. And I have friends in BC, they're over $2 a liter.
But all of a sudden, the petrodollar through the U.S., which is, has always been an awkward concept, right? Some people even call it a Ponzi scheme. It's always been an awkward concept, right? So all of a sudden the U.S. is like, we're being challenged here. They go in and they actually start to bomb Iran, right? They form the faction with Israel. Off they go. And next thing you know, we're in this, what seems to be a never-ending war. Right?
Paul, I really think if Donald Trump had more spine and more backbone, he could have told Benjamin Netanyahu, good luck, you're on your own. We don't want to be part of this. He didn't have to say yes. And he didn't have to join Israel in the bombing of Tehran.
So what was he supposed to do?
But do you want some missiles? Do you want some bombs? Here you go. We're not sending our planes and troops. And they've got 13 KIA so far. They've lost 42 invaluable planes. They spent so far $29 billion to date in Iran. Every president doesn't have to say every yes to everything when someone calls. I think sometimes they have to say, you're on your own. Good luck. We'll give you some supplies. We wish you the best of luck.
But so in my mind, Jim, at that point, he's nervous, right? He's nervous that gold is going to become the new medium. So remember, and we all remember driving by the airport in Toronto and seeing that big Russian plane that we
Still there?
Still there?
Yes,
Still
we
there?
had sanctioned, right?
Yeah.
Well, I looked at before the show. The world had sanctioned and taken $200 billion off the Russians. They had cut them off the global SWIFT payment system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now the Russians are like, okay, that's fine. Take me off the system. I'm going to start a new medium of exchange. Hey, it's going to be gold. I'm going to start to exchange with China, Iran. I'm going to get cozy. That wasn't something, I think the unintended effect of that, which came from, U.S. had nothing, well, they got into it after, but they really were kind of victims to that at that point because Russia starts this conflict with Ukraine. Quite frankly, it starts this domino effect, which had challenged the U.S. dollar and the petrodollar. And now we're going down a path, right? All of a sudden, they decide, okay, we're going to get into it with Israel. We're going to go to Iran. It cuts off China, right? It cuts off oil reserves. It now takes away sort of the golds. You notice, again, we don't talk about gold anymore, right? Gold's off the mark. I guess gold traders do, but when gold was going so high every morning in the news, it was like, holy cow, do you have any gold?
I should sell my ring.
I should sell my ring. Yeah, exactly. Now we're not doing it. Right?
Hey, my wife would kill me.
Yeah. So now we're in the point where this is going on. And to your point, we're just talking about oil at the pump, right?
Yeah.
So we've brought the narrative back where the U.S. wanted it to be. So the U.S., it was slipping away from them. Now it's kind of gone back, right? Now they have some other issues now, right? They have this topographical mess that they can't get into of a mountain range.
Well, the
And they
Strait of
have
Hormuz.
a 33 kilometers straight that they can't seem to get under control. So it is, what do they do with that right now, right, Brian? It's like, where do they go? They have, most of their Navy sitting there. I think they have, where's their Navy now, Jim? In the Caribbean and over in the Middle East, right?
Well, and a lot of it is in the Indian Ocean, south of the Strait of Hormuz. That's where the bulk of it is, because they won't try to put $2 billion destroyers to the strait so it can be taken up by one lucky shot.
Yeah.
It's too much of a risk.
Yeah,
Right.
one mine.
Exactly, because they can, from the Indian Ocean, they can fire airstrikes from their carriers basically anywhere they want at range, and they still have air bases, land-based planes in Kuwait and places like that.
I don't really know where they go. It's
a great question.
It is what can they think of next? That's really what it boils down to, because I think it's like it's design on the fly. They didn't expect this. They didn't anticipate that. I don't know what I'm going to do here. but I know I have this ally over here that I've got to do something for, right? So it's not even three-dimensional. Everything is a one-dimensional approach.
Right.
Here is my ally. I must do something for my ally. And if that involves me doing what my ally tells me to do, then I must do that. My ships are useless. We've taken out the entire Iranian Navy, and they still have 10,000 speedboats running through the Strait of Hormuz that can do enough damage to destroy anything.
An untold number of drones.
And an untold number of drones. They have Iran, as I mentioned earlier, when we were speaking in the back, it's an empire. It's difficult to take down in an empire. America is an empire. Now it's empire versus empire. And people can say what they want about Iran being backwards or forwards or crazy or whatever. It doesn't change the fact that it has historical significance on the world stage. And it has had for a very, very long time. So it's about the people. And I don't know how you can go into a nation like that when the people are going to be behind anything and everything.
And Brian, I think it's naive to think, oh, they're backwards when they have such sophisticated state-of-the-art drones that can do so much damage. That's their technology and that's their brain power and science behind it. And at the same time, as you talked about, one-dimensional. Yeah, J.D. Vance, well reported, and other senior members of the administration begging Trump, don't do this. Don't do this. And so Hanks is like, yeah, like a little lapdog, let's go. And then they fired all these generals and tried to push back and said, we can't do this. So I think it's an absolute mess in the White House and the Pentagon about what to do next. Because you're right. They don't know what their next step is.
Design on the fly.
Yeah. Well, again, there is no war that you can actually totally plan for. I think, Colin Powell said that, when you step off the helicopter, 95% of your plan goes to hell, right?
But thanks to Schwarzkopf and their planning, they were quite planned in the Gulf War. And maybe it wasn't perfectly planned, but they had a beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
But originally, they didn't call it a war. It was a military action.
Right.
There's a big difference. An action is I intend to do something. This is my action.
And it was done pretty quickly.
Right. And then it just devolved into chaos.
Yeah.
And now we're in war, and it's high-tech trench warfare. I don't know if that even makes sense.
No, it does.
I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Here are all these drones, cannon fodder. Send them out. We lost 500 of them. Great. I have a whole tractor trailer load full of C4 and a bunch of other drones that I picked up at Best Buy.
And they're buried
that
in a
I'm gonna just
mountain
launch
and you
them.
can't find them.
Right.
Right. Well, so, they did. And let's go back for a minute, because, I always come back to this national security strategy, because quite frankly, the overall overarching strategy that they do have lies in this paper. And quite frankly, so they did say when they put it out in November 2025, when we read it, the U.S. will control the Western Hemisphere, right? Now we're going to talk a little more about that and what control means. NATO pays for their own defense. So in other words, and they have been pretty, we've stepped up to the table, Jimmy, to your point. We're at the table. We're spending more money. We're trying to come up to the bar,
Germany
right?
is spending even more money. And Poland, and wow, are they spending a lot of money.
China can no longer steal technology, make it, sell it back to the Western Hemisphere at a lower price. USA needs respect. So they were very definitive. And even
How did they enforce that?
even Jameson Greer. So what he's going to say is, I can control my own borders, but quite frankly, my trade with other people cannot do with a third party that's repping for China. So I'm going to stop that. So that's what he's saying
So
when he's
does
talking
that
to us.
mean you can't buy an iPhone in America because it's built in China?
Yeah, well,
It may mean that.
it may mean that.
It may mean bringing factories
They're
back.
yet to define that, right? That's where we're,
they're-
But I mean, there's so much that Americans every day use that don't realize it is made in China. To take that away from them, that would have a pretty dramatic effect on them saying, by the way, we can't make it there. We're going to make it here, and it's going to cost you 10 times as much.
But short-term pain, long-term gain. I mean, what does it take to retool a factory? There's got to be a place in the United States that's already manufacturing something similar. These guys can build these AI centers in a matter of what seems like a few years. You can't tell me they can't build a factory to build a phone. You can't tell me that they can't build better cars. You can't tell, I just don't think that they're going to suffer in the long term. I think it'll be a boom for the United States.
Yeah, I'm not sure they have the mindset of building that many factories and having people work in that many factories like they once did in the halcyon days of the 50s, 60s, and 70s when there were factory towns all over America.
But whose mindset? That's the thing. Like, is it the corporate mindset saying we can't do this? No, too expensive. We don't want to do it, Mr. President. We don't want to do it, America, because that's not going to go over well.
Who's going to work in all these factories to do all this? Because that's not easy work working in a factory.
No, it's not easy work, but it's something that people still do. They might not like it, but it's a leg up. I'm going to go work in this factory. It sucks. You know what I'm going to do now? I've got enough money, and the best time for me to find a better job is while I have a job. And they're going to start turning over employment, and people will start working again, because I don't think that America can be without employment. They can't continue to ship this stuff out. If you took it away, you can bring it back. If it happened once, it can happen again. So America can lift off, but they have to be willing to force those companies that build those things to retool and move the stuff.
And Brian, real quick, I think you're onto something. But then I look at the example of they're trying to build a high-speed rail in California that they're not even close to done, and they're billions over budget. It seems like a lot of people in America we can't build anything anymore. That's a big concern in America now.
I think that has to do with technology and the global economy and relying on other countries to make the technology to build the high-speed rail. When America had to build the Hoover Dam, America built the Hoover Dam.
By hand in the Depression.
When America built Mount Rushmore, they had to do it themselves. And it took time. It took men on swings with chipping hammers to go do that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. I think that once it starts, America's unstoppable. They have one of the best work ethics and one of the best hearts, I guess, for lack of better words, for progress. There's no other nation on the planet that's been as progressive as the United States when it comes to let's produce something.
In 2026, who has the better work ethic? The average American or someone from South Korea or China or Germany, or pick another country? Because once upon a time, I think you were right, but I think the playing field's quite level around the world now.
But Jim and Brian, so this is the interesting thing. So, I'm going to throw the map up, but if they're talking about dividing the world, so what they're saying is we're going to protect the Western Hemisphere. So the United States, Canada, Brazil, they're all going to form, and then everything over from there is not in the Western Hemisphere. Right now, you look at it because of a global power, the U.S. being such a global power, they actually kind of keep world order by protecting the first island chain, right? South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, right? Mm-hmm. So now, we're talking about Iran and everything going. So, in the National Defense Strategy paper, they do talk about the fact that, they want to keep China at bay. They want to get their production back. And then they talk about reinvigorating manufacturing, especially in defense. So they really, that's part of the paper. So what they're saying is, hey, we're bringing it back, right? And the interesting thing is a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of shocked that Ford and GM signed a military contract. Now, I understand why, because the margins on military got to be huge, crazy bonkers, right? Compared to cars now.
Well, they overpay for everything.
Yeah.
So the $20,000 Jeep, they charge $100,000, so they make a fortune.
Yeah,
but they're starting to retool their factories on the auto side to get into defense. So they are doing that now. Now that's not going to be a fast thing. That'll take a year or two, but that is something they're starting to do. So they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, this is coming back. So now you have Iran, right? You have the Monroe Doctrine and you have the national strategy, defense strategy. And then you look at it and you say, okay, this conflict's going to take a while, right? This is going on and on and on. Does the U.S. have the stomach, to do this? And in the middle of this, all of a sudden, they actually they pass legislation for a draft. Now, a draft being they're going to sign people up automatically between 19 and 25. So they're thinking to themselves, okay, there is a conflict coming. I do need to prepare for this. I need to start to register people for the draft lottery. So then they start. So now you have two movements happening, right? You have this contract with the automakers, the big one, two of the big three. You have this trying to find resources. In Canada, I just came from a job fair. We're still going to job fairs trying to find, anyone who can walk and chew gum, or the people I saw today can only do one of those at a time. But, quite frankly, we're trying to pick anyone who's got a warm body and put them in right now. They're actively registering everyone from the ages of 19 to 25. So it's a different approach, right? So they're looking at something coming down. So then, we go to Iran and you say, okay, what are we going to do in Iran, right? Sure, they can, they can cut it off. They can, blockade it. They can try to give arms to the bullocks and the Kurds on the edge, on the outskirts of Iran, because quite frankly, that just causes disruption and civil interference. They can cut off Tehran, and try to strangle it from resources and food, because we all know in that part of the world, quite frankly, they sell oil for food, right? So we can do all those things and we can try to get it, but that's going to take a while, right? And quite frankly, that's just probably going to bring Russia to the table faster, the harder they strangle, right? So it really is a tough.
I think the draft thing is a huge mistake by Trump and the Americans. One of the great rock songs ever written was written by a Canadian from Neil Young when he's with Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, called Ohio. 4 dead in Ohio. Kent State, they shot 4 students with live rounds and killed them because they were protesting the draft in the Vietnam War. People forget that. And the people thinking about this, the campuses of America, they were rioting, and people were escaping to Canada. It was a horrible time in America during the draft. That's why they got rid of it in 1973. And to tell young Americans now, by the way, you've just been drafted to the Navy or Army or whatnot, and you have to report for duty. It's a different time, different mindset of a population now.
I think what we have to do with the draft is we have to look at, let's define young Americans. Young Americans aren't every middle-class kid or every upper-class kid. It's also a massive amount of the population that are living in poverty, or they're new to the United States.
Well, look at all the young, poor black people in Vietnam.
I don't disagree.
Yes.
But when those people came back, as difficult as it was to come back from war, no matter what, and even in the Second World War and the First World War, it was farm boys. And it was whoever they could get. There's one thing that you can't deny. And right now, we talked about this in the back again. Something that's missing in America right now is pride. There's a lot of self-loathing amongst their own population.
Yes.
The one thing that the military introduces to a population better than anything, especially the United States military, is pride and discipline. And America is lacking both. So to bring back the draft, let's not even call it a draft for people to go to battle. Let's just call it military service, mandatory military service. You got to do your 2 years. You might be washing trucks. Either way, they're going to have to develop pride and discipline. They're going to have to understand what a command structure looks like so that they're better suited to leave the military and go back to work when that factory retools to build the
You
phone.
make a great point. I mean, look at the BTS is one of the biggest bands in the world. The members just did their mandatory military service for South Korea. Even though they were the biggest band in the world, they had no exceptions. There's many stars in the NHL from Finland and Sweden who had to delay playing in the NHL to do mandatory military service. So it's common around the world.
So I don't think it's necessary. It might be a horrible thing if you're forcing kids to go to a war that they don't need to fight, such as like Vietnam was a bad idea.
Yeah, or maybe Iran
Right?
Yeah.
That's a bad idea. But if you're doing it to help reclaim national pride amongst your population, it might work. Because for the past 20 years, where has everything come? So what has been delivered to the young people of the United States? TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all these kinds of things.
Mental health issues.
Mental health issues, SSRIs, right? Whatever else it might be, medications.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You're hyperactive and you're 22 and you're still on Ritalin. Try the military. Maybe tire yourself out for a few hours a day and you'll sleep better.
Well, and learn a trade.
And learn a trade.
But it's interesting, StatsCan just did a bunch of demographic analysis, and they came out and they talked about the U.S. versus Canada and what the composition of people will be in 2030. So, in America, I was shocked to say that it will only be 40% Caucasian.
In America?
In America. It's a lot lower than you think. So to Brian's point, I think, and it's very similar in Canada, quite frankly, and that's no shock because the massive amount of immigration we've had.
And Europe.
Yeah, and it was that way, quite frankly, when my family arrived, right? It would change the composition of the country based on the number of people that came in at that time.
Yeah.
We've seen an onslaught of it, but those people now are wondering what to do now in America. So if they can join the military, and that's what they're thinking now, and they can get a trade and they can figure out things, The interesting issue, though, is okay, so now we're in Iran, or they're in Iran. The U.S. is in Iran. They're sitting there. It's looking like it's prolonging, right? So he's struggling to get
Way longer than they ever thought.
struggling to get ceasefires. He's struggling to get a strategy. He's trying to wait them out with blockades. The civil unrest in the U.S. right now is increasing. So people don't like the oil. They don't like elections. He's getting closer to election time, midterms, everything's starting to happen. So the interesting thing is what happens at election time. So does he just say, okay, elections, I'm going to step down? Does he, does Don Jr. run? Does he get back in and then drop out? Does he call war? Is the war so far, the War Act in place, and then he calls a war? So we're assuming that we wait him out in Canada. So right now we're assuming that we get to the point where Trump disappears, he steps down, he goes off into the sunset, into retirement. What if that doesn't happen? Well, that's something.
Well, I mean, that's the old saying, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'll give Carney credit, just going about his business, doing his thing, and let Trump keep tripping over himself and making these international mistakes. Look at the problems he's having now on the world stage, dealing with other countries. There are other countries now who are not turning to Lockheed and Boeing and General Dynamics to spend 10, 20, $50 billion and stuff because they're so upset with Trump in America. And that's costing them business. And the business leaders and the factories and the billionaires and the hedge funds, that's where he's going to start really feeling the pressure when other deals are being made by other countries because they don't have the close relationship with America anymore.
Right. But he's saying to them right now, I think what the conversation's going on is you got to wait because, if I do get through and we take over Iran, you guys are going to have lots of work. They're thinking, okay, that's fine. But if he doesn't take over Iran and he has to come back, so say at the end of it, he's still in power, the war is over, or not, the war is over for America. So say they've lost the war, they have to come back. It's really just retreating back to the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Right? So then the rest of the world really turns into anarchy if you think about it. So at that point, you have Israel, has to move forward. So they go head on no matter what. They can't back out.
I mean, unless the Knesset and the Israeli government push back against Netanyahu and don't let him. Unless there's an upheaval in Israeli politics. Because I can't imagine that everyone in Israel is on board with everything going on. I would think there is some dissension within the Israelis and the Israeli government about this and about the actions of Netanyahu.
Well, and Netanyahu is up on corruption charges. He's
Right.
being looked at as a war criminal now. There are all these other kinds of things. And when you corner an angry dog is going to bite. And this dog right now is fighting for its life,
Right.
as far as I can see. I don't think that has, I think a lot of what Israel is doing doesn't have anything to do with Israel. I think it just has to do with Netanyahu
Yeah.
and a bunch of cronies
Yes.
that are trying to stay alive.
And look at the blowback to innocent Jewish people around the world are facing all this abuse. They have no ties to Netanyahu, the Israeli military, and they're feeling the brunt of it.
To what Paul was saying at this point, what I kind of think might happen is that if America leaves Iran as the loser, let's say.
Even though Trump says we won.
Right. Even if he says we lost,
Yeah.
they still win. Because Netanyahu will have to face his own charges. He'll have to go up against the world alone at some point.
Huh.
The Israeli government will probably return to sensibility at some point.
And elect a moderate?
And elect a moderate.
Right.
The Americans come home. They start to take control of the hemisphere like you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, I'm just going to check my notes here. Right. The only thing Americans care about are meat, vegetables, bread,
Price of
and
gas.
water. And that's it. And when all of that comes back, peace is returned to the Western Hemisphere, and the other side of the world can fend for themselves. And to remember that,
Like back in the 1930s, right?
Like in the 30s. And remember what George Carlin once said about the Middle East? Seal their borders and give them better weapons training. Right?
That's a good line.
And that's kind of what I think might happen.
Yeah.
But the U.S. still has the same. So think economics, right? Economic stability, right, brings stability, national stability. The problem he has right now is if he comes back, he still has the issue of the $40 trillion debt. So he's amassed, Jimmy, to your point, he's went over there and he spent a ton of money. So he's got, so, you know, if he comes back and there's peace throughout the world and everyone goes back to, he is a really huge financial loser in this, which actually takes the U.S. into a bigger hole. So quite frankly, he's left there. We talked about whether the standard of currency would change. Quite frankly, once they come back and just go to the Western Hemisphere, it does change the world. So they're kind of in a weird position where, you know, peace in the world is not really advantageous to them because, quite frankly, being a manufacturing force for military throughout the world and selling manufacturing, doing all those things is really a good catalyst to remove the debt in the United States. So
Has been that way since 1940, right?
it's been that in 1940. So, you know, you figure we just talked about Israel. So if the U.S. backs out of Iran, heads home, quite frankly, you know, Israel, has to move quickly to do something or back off. They have to change governments. If they can't change governments, they'll go further. They'll attack harder and they'll try to get, which then they'll come face to face with Turkey at some point, which then is a real.
That would, you know, that they don't want anything to do with Turkey.
Yeah.
They don't want anything to do with them.
I know, but that's honestly, that's
But no, but you're not wrong. I'm just saying that would be
Yeah.
bad for Israel.
I
Really
know,
bad.
But that's where it ends up, right? You know, at that point, quite frankly, you have China staring down Taiwan. The U.S. is gone. The U.S. has gone back to the Western Hemisphere. You have South Korea, North Korea. Quite frankly, the Russians go and they take over Odessa. Once they get control of Odessa and the Black Sea, they have all the shipping lanes, right?
Yeah, but I think you're giving the Russian military a little too much credit right now. They have suffered egregious losses with men and material. They're a wounded bear, you know, pardon the pun. But I mean, I think they'd like to get Odessa in the shipping lanes, but they have got to figure out what they're going to do with Ukraine and try to get out of that. And they have a lot of rebuilding to do. They have spent way, way more money in this war than they ever thought possible.
But now, okay, so Jimmy, I get it. But now in this scenario, quite frankly, their oil and they now have a free lane anywhere they want to go into China. They have resources. Quite frankly, a lot of the money that actually left Russia, you know, from what I'm being told from friends at dinner parties, quite frankly, is in other countries and beautiful homes and cars. So, you know, a lot of things, a lot of money goes into Russia that doesn't go into Russia, right? So, quite frankly, there is debt. I agree. There's huge debt. There's GDP issues, but quite frankly, that with the U.S. retreating to the Western Hemisphere, it frees up a whole lane for the Russians to move throughout Europe. You know, it does free up a lot of things. And, you know, part of what the U.S. is saying in their national defense strategy is, hey, I gave you a warning. You better protect yourself. If I'm leaving here, I'm going back to protect my place now, right? My living room, I'm going back to my living room. You are back to your living room. You better make sure you can protect
Poland's ready. West Germany's ready. The Baltic states have beefed up huge. There's a lot of those Eastern NATO countries, as it were. They know what the potential is coming. It's exactly what you said, Paul. And they've been spending way, way more money than anyone thought possible to prepare for it.
But so then, you know, that's kind of the theory, you know, that podcast I was telling you about and Professor Zhang, that's where he was going, quite frankly. He's saying the World War III is happening, right? It's just, and that it all is stimulated by the U.S. retreating back to the U.S. into the West Hemisphere. Now,
See, I'll push back on Professor Zhang. To me, it starts when China goes to Taiwan. That's when things kick off.
I don't think China goes to Taiwan.
So I don't think so. But if that happens, then we got some serious problems.
They can surround Taiwan, but they're not going to take Taiwan. I don't think they can do it. I think it's too difficult a target for them to take. We can say whatever. They're not going to go in there and fire missiles into Taipei. They're not going to destroy the asset. That's not the Chinese way
they
of
need
doing
it.
things.
Yeah.
Right. So so look at Taiwan is an asset. It's not land that they need. Right. So I don't see that happening. I think that the Chinese will play. They'll try and play it up strong.
Mm-hmm.
They'll try and, you know, they'll posture. They'll do all of that sort of thing. But one thing about the Chinese that people tend to forget is the second somebody pushes back, they capitulate. And then they run back into their corner and they go, hang on a second, let's figure out another angle.
Because they want the
Let's go around
chips.
this way.
They want the
They want
technology.
it.
They want what Taiwan has.
Right.
Right. Well, and you know, the professor actually, that was an interesting comment. He does say that China does bargain their way. So at the end of this, as everything's happening, China doesn't ever get into any of these conflicts. China actually
No.
sits on the side and bargains with the U.S. They financially support Russia. So they give money to Russia and they say, Russia, you go out and protect Iran. You go out and protect. So they actually fund, but they don't enter into conflicts, right? So it's interesting. So while negotiating with the U.S., they'll be actually funding others. So they'll just be working behind the scenes, kind of working their thing out. But that does lead us back to, which is very interesting, we're coming back to North America, and we're coming back to where does it leave Canada right now? Because quite frankly, we're in the Western Hemisphere again. Here we are back home. What do we do? You know, where does that leave us? Because we're going through CUSMA in July. We're being told, quite frankly,
Right.
we're going to be tariffed. We're being told.
Well, this week they signed a massive deal with a German power company for decades of liquid natural gas to be shipped from the coast of BC to Germany. And I think that's part of it. And they're really determined to get that liquid natural gas plant in Churchill, Manitoba.
Yes.
And look, this is why Stephen Guilbeault stepped down from cabinet, because they're like, wait a second, that's not what Justin Trudeau wanted. But Carney doesn't care, and he's going to start shipping oil and gas to all those European countries and wipe out our deficit as much as we can.
Well, this is something that, again, when Canada comes under pressure, one of the things we can question and we can judge, and we're smug that way as a nation. We're often too smug for our own good.
Yep.
But because we're suffering so much now with fuel prices, grocery prices. I watched a young man and a young woman in the grocery store the other day. I saw the guy pick up a steak, and I watched him look at it, and I saw him put it back. And I felt so
I saw that with
bad
ground
for
beef the
guy.
other day at my no-frills.
I felt horrible. But here's what might happen in Canada if we start to open our eyes and think for ourselves again. And I mean as individuals, not this big collective thinking. This group thinks like that, that group thinks like this. But ultimately, at some point, maybe we're going to start reevaluating our self-worth as Canadians, not as the block of Canadians that the government keeps telling us, you know, we're doing this for you and we're doing this for you. You're not doing it for me. You're doing it for somebody else. And as Canadians, I think it would be great if we just opened our eyes and went, you know what? Look at all these natural resources. Son of a bitch. I wonder what might happen if we open this up and get rid of some regulation. Holy cow, 21-year-old kids are making 110 grand every 6 months.
And now with the
working
tax
oil
revenue,
patch.
we just built 10 more hospitals.
Right. And then we can afford the people that are coming into the country because we're creating things, we're building things. We've lost that. We're a self-loathing people that think we're great. And we're not. We're just average Joes trying to make a living.
But we can do great things. But I mean, it's going to take a few years to repair the wounds of 10 years of there's no business case to sell natural gas or oil.
Sure.
And now those wounds are finally being healed. And you're right, though. If we have it and people want it, why not sell it to them?
You know what makes people feel really good, especially people that don't have a job? The one thing that makes those people feel great is having a job.
Yeah.
Getting up in the morning.
No kidding.
A sense of purpose that goes beyond marching with a sign or screaming that you're hard done by.
And every
that life is
psychologist in the
unfair.
world would agree with you.
Yeah. Work is good.
Yeah.
I'm with you. One of the things we got to remember, just to keep in mind, though, if Iran doesn't go well, right, for them, for the Americans, and quite frankly, they retreat back into the Western Hemisphere, the shipping lanes change, right? So over time, the shipping lanes will be controlled differently. So right now, you know, when you talk about natural gas to Germany, you talk about all those things, shipping lanes are different. Like, part of what Canadians, we've reaped the benefit of global security from the Americans. We don't talk about it a lot. And I think Brian said
I don't disagree at all.
So if you look at this map and you look at sort of, we'll throw another map up, but the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz, these are small straits that things are shipped through. But now all of a sudden, Americans are gone, and, before they were left open, quite frankly, because the Americans provided security to countries within that region. If securities to countries within that region are gone, then the shipping lanes change. Then the ability to, and I think where Brian was going is the same place, but the ability for Canadians to ship things abroad changes. So quite frankly, you think about it, if I'm in China or if I'm, reached a deal with Taiwan, so maybe they definitely won't destroy Taiwan, but Taiwan and them will bargain and they'll reach a consensus because with the Americans gone, it changes the global security network. So at that point, they'll reach a deal. Do I want anything from Canada at this point?
Well,
no,
I mean,
quite frankly, I'm going to go get it from Russia because quite frankly, China and Russia were in the deal before. China, Russia, and Iran were in the deal before. China, Russia, and Iran. So all these factions, these BRICS factions, now control this part of the world. So
don't forget now, Australia and Japan are in the midst of a massive rebuild of their Navy because I think they know what's coming, what you're talking about. They're going to try to fill that void because their economies are so tied to that strait.
Oh, yeah.
And those shipping lanes in that part of the world. So Australia,
I wouldn't want to be Australia. Right?
And they have
wouldn't wanna
spent
be Australia.
ridiculous money in the last few years in their military, and Japan as well. They've gone back to shipbuilding like it was during World War II.
Well, they have to be, right? Because you look at it now, shipping lanes got to be, because if you look at this map, and this is the map of the world, quite frankly, and you look at this Western Hemisphere cutoff, Americans are only going to go this far. Right? They might tinker with a little bit, but, before when they were, had ships all over here and that's all gone now, right? So that's part of this national defense strategy. They're going to pull back and say, okay.
They have 11 aircraft carriers worth $12 billion each, filled with the most sophisticated aircraft in the world. They're going to want to go more than just off the shore of Virginia.
Don't forget the Ohio-class submarines.
Exactly.
All over the world.
Yeah, they are right now, but could be anywhere.
I think that with what Paul was saying there, if America comes back and Canada has to, try and make deals and things like that, we still have South America. We still have the entire west coast of Africa and Europe. We're still in 3/4 of Europe, and the EU has such a hate on for Russia,
big time,
that they're just going to go, no, I don't think so, until Russia starts to come to the table and play the game,
because that's their way of protesting Russia, right?
Right. That's it. That's all they have, right? And in order for Europe to even succeed and defend themselves, how much money are they going to have to print? Right. But now the euro becomes devalued over time, just like the Canadian dollar, just like the American dollar, just like any other dollar on the planet right now. And then that's the end of it. I think we're in a catbird seat. I really do.
And then we just signed also a deal. Trump okayed it to build an oil pipeline to Wyoming, to southern Wyoming. Yep. So we're going to ship even more oil to America than we do right now.
Yeah, I don't think we have a problem. I think the Western Hemisphere, thank God for this large ocean in between us and the other side of the world.
Absolutely.
But we may not flourish in the way that we have for so many years, right? But I still think we're going to be successful once we open up South America a little bit more, once we open up the west coast of Africa with all the minerals. We don't want China to have any part of Africa at all.
So now the potash,
agreed, or the Russians, quite frankly, because the Russians are there in a big way right now.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So quite frankly, that's my concern about that is quite frankly, the Russians will right away shipping lanes back over to Africa. They'll lock it up as fast as they can, right? Because they know the value.
They've really got to do something about their Navy. They took a real kicking against Ukraine. Their Navy is not the way it should be to do that kind of blue water around the world.
But they're a resilient nation, and what they'll do is make a whole bunch of equipment that's really, really bad. Right?
Yeah.
So they'll make
Take it next.
10,000 battleships that float for a week.
Yeah.
And then, look, Canada built ships in the Second World War. They were made out of wood.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we had one of the largest navies, but they were ships made out of wood.
The one thing that's helping Canada now because of what's going on in Iran is potash in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Because of fertilizer issues around the world, all of a sudden that's become more valuable. We have a food insecurity problem around the world, so all of a sudden that Saskatchewan potash is way up in value.
If all we did was take potash and oil and made fertilizer, we could rule the world.
Well, we'd have no debt.
Fertilizer.
Yes,
we'd have
We
no
have
debt.
no debt.
We could.
Because India and all those countries are desperate for it.
Desperate for it.
But don't forget, so, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer,
No.
right? But I'm just saying.
Oh, go ahead.
So,
Baseball, it's a safe space.
that's it. But with the U.S. coming back to dominate the Western Hemisphere, quite frankly, they know that too, right? So quite frankly, the tax on it and the money, again, think about everything with a VIG now, right? So think about everything you sell has a VIG on it. So before, we freely traded on our own.
Right.
Now, quite frankly, okay, yeah, you can trade it. You can. Do I want you to send fertilizer to China? No, right?
But
So-
they definitely want it in those
but-
cornfields and the fruit crops of
Brazil and
California.
Peru and
Yeah.
places
Oh,
like
yeah.
that,
They'll
all
take
over.
it for them, but will they let us ship it there? Again, if you look at the dividing line,
Yep.
right? That's anything that's going to cross there. They want a
Yep.
say so in.
They're going to be leaving ports in Vancouver and the Pacific Coast and going that way.
Yeah.
I think they're fine.
Well, I hope so, Jim. I hope so.
I mean, I understand like what the when the doctrine came to be 120 some years ago, the world was such a different place. And there was only a few countries in the world that actually had a significant Navy, the Royal Navy, which ain't what it used to be,
No.
the American Navy and the German Navy and the Japanese Navy. The Russian Navy was okay. But now you've got, third world countries with sophisticated warships that can shoot a missile and take out another ship from 100 kilometers away. I mean, the world has changed that way you have countries that never even thought about before now that will give you a bloody nose.
Yeah.
right. Well, and that's created the national defense strategy, right? So part of that is, quite frankly, part of the Iran test, quite frankly, if they can't get through Iran, it really says that the world's changed and we have to come back to the Western Hemisphere, retool, our Air Force, our Navy, we have to build up our factions of people. We have to draft. It really is. I don't think, the interesting thing, the draft that we're talking about earlier, I don't think the draft particularly is for Iran. I think the draft is in consideration of the next round. I think they're looking at it and saying, okay,
5 years from now.
I think honestly, I think what they're saying is, okay, I think we've seen what the world is now. We've seen the sophistication. So what we're doing is, we're starting to plan. And, the other thing that I think as Canadians, we have to keep in mind, we saw this with the Biden years. A lot of things that were put in place from a military and a national security perspective were not done away with when Biden came to bear, right? No. So we think that the Democrats are going to get in, the world's going to change. The national defense strategy isn't going to alter.
No.
Quite frankly, what Democrats tend to do, they tend to enshrine it with legislation. So the one thing that Republicans don't do very well is they don't paper it. But the one thing that Democrats do really well is they actually take it, twist it, they got a really weird spin on it, and quite frankly, they write it and legislate it. So, what we're seeing here now, I think as Canadians, we got to be a little careful that we're waiting to say, okay, maybe maybe Trump retires, maybe that doesn't for it, maybe the election said, whatever happens here. But that doesn't mean that the national defense strategy
Okay.
changes.
I just don't understand in my wildest thinking how they thought they could just drop a few bombs on Iran without putting any people on the ground and thought they would win.
But
That seemed like someone thought that up and people agreed to it. It seems ludicrous.
it's the economics. I started the show with the
But
economics,
it's
Jim.
the arrogance of the current U.S. administration not listening to experts who have a differing opinion.
Well, it's either they're crazy or crazy like a fox, right? Because it's look at it from a different perspective. It's disruptive technology, right? So what they did was they went in there and they dropped a couple of bombs on Iran, like you said. Now the whole world has to retool, and they've got to figure out what they're going to do next. And how
But
they're
Iran
gonna
still's
survive.
got the uranium.
Well, Iran. I don't even care about the uranium. That to me, that's a circus sideshow.
Is that right?
This has nothing to do with uranium. I wish years ago I would have said, sure, of course, let's get their uranium. How dare they ever want to make a bomb? How dare they want to build a power plant? I don't think that's it. I think that is great public relations strategy in the media. We want the uranium. Okay, then why are you still there? You've buried it under tons and tons of rubble, right? The UN is invited in to go look at stuff. No one's really ever, Iran has said, yeah, come on in, take a look around. Here's the doors open, have a look, right? No, let's just drop more bombs. We're going to get that uranium, though. That's why we're doing it, even though they said that they might let us in. And even though they said, that's not it. There's something bigger and broader here, right? So they're America and whatever factions in the Middle East that are positioning themselves against Iran right now, whatever U.S. allies are buying into this charade, right? There's something else that I don't know what it is. Is it about destabilizing currencies all over the world so that we can engage in one world currency or electronic currencies and cryptocurrencies, or like, I have no clue.
I mean, the only winners right now are people who were somehow got the information to short oil stocks or go long when the price went up and down and made a fortune on Bay Street and Wall Street.
Yeah.
And the military industrial complex will have to replace all the lost equipment.
So oil is up through the roof. That's good for Canada. That's good for the U.S. It's really good for Saudi Arabia. Gold is through the roof, which is great for China and a whole bunch of other countries that have massive gold reserves. How much did those nations' net worth increase over a few months?
Well,
It's
exponentially.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So now they have more purchasing power.
Yeah.
This is what I don't understand.
And the-
It's just completely mind-boggling. It's befuddling to me because there's no rhyme or reason to any of it.
Well, like you said, Paul, that Professor Zhang and everyone else are like, they're all like, but why? That's some of the big question, but why?
It's the economics. It has to be. You mentioned some of the winners and some of the losers, and the industrial military machine, right? Manufacturing. Those are the winners in this scenario. And quite frankly, we as Canadians have to figure out a way to be winners in it.
Well,
that's really where, when I look at it, I'm starting to think to myself as I'm watching, I'm going, okay, I kind of get this is, going to go on for a while. I kind of get that, probably the U.S. will at some point hold out. I hope the U.S. Disruption to the communities and the civil unrest will not be too harsh, quite frankly, because we'll have it spill over to Canada. I hope that all kind of makes itself and calms itself down, whether they have to go home or not. But how do we as Canadians benefit from this? Because quite frankly, whether it's potash or finding ways, we're going to have to cut this deal. I wasn't super, where I started the show, and I'll end the show, but with you, where I'm a little bit concerned is when Jameson Greer gets up and he says, you know what, guys, you're going to do well if you actually pay the tariff, and then if you abide by our tariffs on other nations outside our hemisphere. And that really concerns me.
So he's played his cards.
He's played his cards.
And then so now Carney hasn't responded yet. And
Nope.
we don't know exactly what Carney's strategy is going to be, because Greer has been, actually, he just threw his cards on the table like, here's my suite. Here's my king and ace and jack. And like, what are you going to do now?
But he's not. So I guess, Jim, where I'm kind of going with it, the national security strategy, he's not playing the cards. That's where he's at. Like, he's not negotiating. Like
That's what I'm saying. No, he's
yeah.
like, here.
Yeah.
He's not hiding anything. That's
No,
what
I'm not
saying.
negotiating it. And this is the first time this week. The reason, the relevance to me and of this week is this is the first time that someone from the United States, from a trade perspective, has just stood up. We've had Lutnick, kind of yell at us and say, you know what, you guys have the best deal, stop complaining and all this stuff. This is the first time someone civilly actually said, you know what, you guys have, kicked back on tariffs like China. And by the way, we're not going to be taking a tariff off you. By the way, you need to abide by the other tariffs that we're having around the world. You can't bring Chinese, and by the way, you can't bring Chinese goods in that'll come to the U.S. in any shape or form. And, he even went so far this week, and I think the auto guys are reeling a little bit because it's been a tough week on them. I know they are in Mexico. I was reading the news in Mexico as we came into the show. They're just telling them, you're done with auto. They're saying to the Mexicans, it's over. You're done. We are bringing auto back home. And quite frankly, you can sell cars to yourselves, but
Wait a sec. So you're telling me if Volkswagen wants to build cheap cars in Mexico and ship them back to Europe, what's to stop them?
Well, they can do that.
That's Volkswagen.
That's Volkswagen.
Yeah.
But
That's Volkswagen.
But you definitely know anything you're doing, like, and I'm not going to question the sanity of it, but we just gave $500 million to a couple of the big three to get them to retool back to gas. At the same time, they're signing deals in the U.S. to build weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of looking at, I don't know. Like, I would have actually waited a while and seen what was going to happen, because if you get to July 1 and they come to the table and say, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but you're not selling cars.
I think at the end of the day, gentlemen, we will get some wins, but we'll also take a bit in the chin. I think Canadians have to prepare themselves like a boxing match. You're going to be Carney might have a cut on his eyebrow and a cracked rib and maybe, some stuffing up his nostrils, but may have a TKO at the end for all we know. So like Canada will not win every battle, but maybe come out of it better than we think.
Well, I think that I like your analogy, right? We're going to take some hits on the chin. But what we have to do as a nation right now is you're either predator or prey, or you live in synergy with the predator. So if America is saying, you got to pay us the VIG, right? Okay, no problem. And I just better go out and find some sales. And I better pay the VIG so somebody doesn't kneecap me in a couple of years or in a couple of months or whatever. So we should become predators. We should be looking at our country and going, let's develop this stuff. Let's send forces out to sell this stuff. Let's create an economy again, because our economy just doesn't seem to exist.
And ram through like dam the torpedoes, build the dams and the this and that and the pipelines, and just start sell.
Not up or shut up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
Can I, again, not trying to be a naysayer, but I'm going to throw this on the table.
Paul.
Sorry.
Negative.
I just did a show on real estate, right? So, and we were talking about real estate in BC right now being in the tooth because the legislation on property ownership is up in the air. So you can't.
Well, they don't even know in the House of Commons. They don't have a definition.
Address it.
Right. So let's take that on a bigger scale. You don't know the outcome in the Western Hemisphere, right? So we can hold investment summits in the late summer, early fall. But quite frankly, if I'm coming from here to invest in here, I better know the climate, right? So I think one of the things we've kind of overlooked a little, we got to get to that table. We got to have those negotiations. We got to know what the VIG is. And quite frankly, we got to before then. And I think that's kind of to me where you can have all kinds of investment strategies. You better know what your climate and your environment is and how stable you are.
But isn't that what they're going to find out in the next 3 or 4 weeks?
Okay, so think about it. This is my concern right now. If I'm America right now, why would I rush to do that?
I wouldn't.
No,
wouldn't.
I would sit you out. I'd sit you out into the next year. Exactly. I would just sit you out and go, okay, yeah. You didn't want to, you and China were screwing with my tariffs. Yeah, okay. Have your investment summit because I'm not sure anyone's showing
Carney's
up.
in New York City like today cutting deals.
Yeah, I know, but the States is going to be, they're the cooler right now. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. They're going to
Carney has traveled to every continent in the world to come up with something. So it's a great question.
But can I tell you something? There's probably a condition, and again, we've all done a bunch of agreements. There's probably a condition that there's subject to. There's a bunch of lawyers
subject to ...
CUSMA, negotiations, EVA, July. You know what I mean? Like, because they're going to want to know the VIG, and they're going to want to know what we got to get this, regardless. But what worried me is we didn't. They're going to Mexico. We're being left here. July 1's just around the corner. Look at the date today, right? We're going into June.
Right, we're almost
30,
there.
Yeah, we're almost 30 days away to the July 1st.
Yeah.
If July 1st comes and no one goes to the table, the Mexicans, the worst thing for us right now is the Mexicans would come July 1st and sign a bilateral deal.
Yeah.
And squeeze Canada out.
Yeah, they just say, we're done.
Well, Scheinbaum's just got to worry about her own people. Mexico's got their own problems. So she's going to, that's her fiduciary responsibility to take care of the Mexican people.
Well, she's also got to understand her economy. I don't even think she knows how her economy works down there because it's reliant so heavily on things like the auto plants. What do they build down there? Like you know what I mean? You don't hear about Mexico producing anything.
Because we have shipbuilding, we have
farm equipment,
but
heavy
it's not
manufacturing.
you know what I mean? It's not common.
Yeah.
Right? So
tourism was maybe one of their biggest industries.
Or ag. Remember,
and ag,
absolutely.
So,
the reason she's at the table, right? She cannot lose the ag.
No way.
She's got to sign a deal, regardless of if they want to pull auto from her. She should give up auto because auto's not on their top. It's number 8.
You better not take away my avocados.
It's number 8 or something, but the avocados are controlled by the cartel.
Exactly.
So there's a whole show on that. But she's got to make sure that agriculture keeps moving into the U.S. right because that's a big part of their economy. But they lock in their deal. We're sitting there. We can go and talk about investment. We got to get this resolved because You look at, and for those people who listen to the show, it really is Iran. You think it doesn't have a big impact. It has a huge impact on the outcome of the next round of our negotiations.
It also has a huge impact, gentlemen, on the perception of other countries. Maybe I wouldn't have done a deal with this country and this country before, but now I'm rethinking it. I may not like you. I may not like your country, but we have to do this because we don't trust America and Trump right now. So we're going to do a deal that maybe we would have done 6 months ago, and we're both going to benefit from it, swallow our pride. And I think there's going to be a lot of deals like that around the world.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind. That's the only way that you do business. Well, I do business with a guy that used to be my main competitor.
Yeah.
We hated one another. You know what? He's a reliable guy.
And you get
Come
paid?
through for me. He got paid. I got paid.
Right.
We competed. Competition's a great thing. I might not like you some days. You might not like me some days. Who cares?
But there's going to be a lot of that around the world in the next couple of years because of what's happened in Iran and just Trump's instability. And they just don't know from week to week what the White House is going to do, what they're going to say and how they're going to act.
It's just not, but it's not just the White House. Nobody knows how anybody's going to act.
Well, that's true,
Look
yeah.
at the EU. What a disaster that is.
I mean,
right?
let's set our time. When's going to be a new British prime minister, right?
Yeah.
Keir Starmer may not be prime minister in a couple months. We just don't know.
No, we have no idea.
I don't know. What we do know is July 1 is fast approaching.
Is it ever?
Yeah.
NHL free agency? Oh, you mean CUSMA? Yeah.